We are live. Hi, everybody. Good evening. Welcome to another edition of Grassroots Motorsports Live. I'm JG Pasterjack. This is my phone, and what I'm doing right now is the thing that I ask everybody to do at the top of every show every week, which is go to your social media, hit this little button that says share right here, and share it on your timeline. That's how easy that is. Look how easy that is. That is so easy. I am a barely literate, emotionally stunted man-child with a 4th grade education. I was able to do it in just a couple minutes while I was talking to you. We got a great show for you guys tonight. We are back from a big adventure this weekend. I'm going to slip this in my pocket for a minute, but we'll be talking to you guys later. So welcome everybody on YouTube, welcome everybody on Facebook, and big shout out to anybody watching us from the SEMA show out in Las Vegas right now. We know that is a big deal going on. And we're also up against World Series Game 7 tonight, which we actually have on over on the TV across the way. So if you suddenly sense that I am not paying attention to you, that means that something very exciting happened over there. And hopefully the team I am rooting for, the team you are rooting for as well, although I'm just hoping for a good game that Houston eventually wins. So here's what we're going to do tonight. This is our brand new to us 2004 Chevrolet Corvette Z06 that we just purchased less than a week ago, last Friday, up in the Chicago, Illinois area. Going to be our next project car for the 2018-2019 editorial cycle of Grassroots Motorsports Magazine. So what we're going to do tonight is we're going to talk a little bit about Corvette buying tips, some C5 shopping tips, and we got Sam Strano on the line. We'll be talking to him momentarily and talking about some basic Corvette performance preparation tips and what do you do to make your C5 go a little bit faster than it already does. And what it already does is fairly impressive. We're also watching everybody's comments and questions here on Facebook. Oh my God, I'm going to turn this down. See. So I'm going to turn myself down right there. If you have a question, if you have a comment, ding us on Facebook or ding us on YouTube. We also have somebody watching the YouTube feed who will relay the questions over to me on Facebook, and that's how we will do it. Like say hi. Our buddy Ian is on already, and Chris Perry, who we just met at the Chicago Region SCCA event last weekend. A absolutely frigidly cold Chicago Region SCCA autocross. I don't think I ever saw a temperature above 37 degrees for the entire day, and it was kind of wet and gnarly. But we survived. My thin Florida blood survived, and we are none the worse for wear. All right, I'm going to put on the cans here, and we're going to talk to Sam Strano because he is waiting on the line all the way from Pennsylvania. Sam, you there, buddy?
Yep.
Hey, awesome. Good, man. Thanks for hanging out with us tonight. So, we've been talking to you at every autocross we've seen you at for the last. Oh, actually, hang on. I got some cool graphics here. There we go. We've been talking to Sam at about every autocross we've seen him at for the last year and a half because we kind of suspected that this was leading the pack for our choice of next project cars. Now, if you're not familiar with Sam Strano, Sam is a guy legendary in autocross prep circles, legendary in various car prep. Sam, I'll let you do it. Tell us about Strano Parts. Give us the quick elevator bio on who you are and what you do.
Oh hell, I'm not good at that part. Just have a little shop here in Pennsylvania. Started autocrossing in like '94. Figured out pretty quickly that a lot of people weren't the most mechanically inclined. And I didn't know how to drive. So once I figured out the how to drive part, then I figured out the how to set up cars part pretty decently. So the business kind of morphed from what we used to do more into performance parts.
So you violently undersold the whole how to drive thing. How many solo national championships or pro solo national championships do you have at this point?
8 solo. be honest with you, I kind of lost track of the Pro Solo stuff. I think depends if you count the overall. I think in 2009, but it's something like 11, I think. 10 or 11.
Okay, so yeah, so when you say you figured out the driving part, that's a bit of an understatement. But you've been a guy associated with Corvettes, for quite a while. You're driving a C6 Z06 right now as kind of your primary competition car, and you walked us through a lot of the stuff on C5. Bargain than these cars right now, than a C5Z. I mean, you're talking about a 400 horsepower sports car for, you can buy them south of $20,000 all day long in good shape. So even as a C6 driver, make the case for me about C5 versus C5Z versus C6Z performance, and kind of what I'm getting for each.
Oh, well, it's actually pretty easy. So people ask me that a lot, and I tell them all day long that C5Zs are the steal of the century, and frankly, are, as far as I'm concerned, a slightly better autocross car. I think they don't believe me because I don't have one, but really, the C6 is, for me, all about the LS7 and the look of it. But the C5Z, I mean, I look at the price of them, and I scratch my head why people do other things.
Yeah.
Every time somebody jumps out, it happened this weekend. Somebody drove one for the first time and kind of had big eyes when they got out, and they're like, it's like a big Miata. Yeah, pretty much. Everybody's shocked the first time they ride in one, especially one that's set up decently. And even better, one that's on really sticky tires, but there's not a better performance bargain out there. Period.
So when you say you think it's a better autocross car, what are sort of the specific parameters that you think make it a better autocross car than the C6Z?
It's smaller. It's narrower, a little bit narrower. It's got a little shorter wheelbase. It's got way shorter gearing, but not short gearing like an MR2 Spider or something like that. You don't run out of second gear at 52 miles an hour. Go about, depends on your tire, but 71-ish, 72-ish, something like that on the limiter. I can go 90 in my car, but how often do you go 90 in an autocross?
Well, and that brings up an interesting point. If you actually graph the speeds you're using at an autocross versus the horsepower that the engine is producing at those RPM, you'll actually kind of see a pattern where you're not really ever getting to a point where you're using all 500 horsepower of that C6Z in an autocross, and your horsepower curves actually look shockingly similar, C5Z versus C6Z on an autocross course.
Yep, it's somebody did a thrust curve a while ago, and I think it was up to about 55 miles an hour, and I forget from what speed they started, but in second gear, up to about 55, the C5 is faster than the C6, which sounds about right, because if I'm on a stock size rear tire, like a Hoosier, I have to go 60 or 61 to get the peak torque.
Yeah.
Not even get to the 500 horsepower.
Yeah. Okay, so let's start with it. So you haven't seen this car. Everybody who's seen this car so far has been fairly impressed at what we paid and what we got. But if I'm looking for a C5Z, we kind of knew what we were after. We were sort of after a 2004 commemorative edition, because they have, you don't necessarily have to be real picky when it comes to a C5Z, but if you're gonna be picky, the 04 commemorative edition is basically gives you the carbon fiber hood. 2004s tend to be have a lot less breakage of valve springs. If there's anything we've seen as far as weaknesses of the LS6 engine, 2002s and 3s have some valve spring breakage issues. They seem to have solved that for 2004. What other kind of stuff am I looking at, just sort of in general, shopping one of these used?
You mean it's specific to a particular model year, or just C5s in general?
Just in general.
Little things. Make sure you drive it. Transmission. Make sure it shifts okay. They're a little heavy if you're used to a smaller car. Obviously, a big T56 and a long shift rod to get back there. But when you drive it, just make sure it's not making all kinds of whiny sounds and stuff like that. pull the oil cap, as usual, just check for water, make sure you don't have a head gasket leak or something, where it's got that nice brown sludge on it. I mean, that's pretty bulletproof. The biggest problem we see with them is when people do pick them up is almost inevitably the first time they autocross them or second time they autocross them, they like to blow up brake master cylinders.
Okay.
We're not sure why, but it seems pretty obvious. They always get little black specks in them, and I think they just these cars don't get used very hard by a lot of people. They get put away. My car had 22,000 miles on it when I bought it, and I think the rubber gets a little hard, and then we all of a sudden slam on the brakes and shove the pistons into places that they've never been in the master cylinder, and it seems to tear up the seals. So that's a pretty common one. I'm guessing the brake fluid on that one's probably pretty clean.
Yeah, let's take a look here, actually. Yeah, this actually looks fairly fresh.
Yeah, even when it's really clean, it can happen. But the good news is master cylinders are cheap. I think a Robestus master cylinder is something like $80 with the reservoir. So
that's something else cool about these cars. I mean, this is essentially a 350 Chevy small block. It's a push rod, 2-valve motor. Once we get underneath, you'll see you could change a starter on this thing in a reasonable amount of time. You can walk into probably any auto parts store and buy an alternator for it. What kind of mileage have you seen out of these LS6s? I mean, this one's got like 94,000 miles on it, but from what we understand, that's for a well cared for motor. That's not a big deal.
No, I don't know how long they'll run. They'll run forever. Mains, and you take care of them. They're pretty impressive. I mean, the intake manifold's dry. There's no coolant running through that. The biggest thing I start to see on cars now is they're just getting old enough that little stupid things like the fact that the manifold is plastic. Like sometimes you'll break a nipple off of the manifold or something if you're trying to work on the car. But they're really reliable. There's just little screwy things that sometimes track guys want to change, like the way the front calipers kind of shift and get cockeyed. But it's hard to beat it. I mean, it's just hard to beat it. My thing is this: it's way easier to change the cylinder heads than it is to change the clutch.
Yeah.
Stuff like that. So that's why when we talked, when you were looking at them, and I knew this one had some miles, I just said, well, just kind of make sure the clutch seems okay, because it's not a fun job. Yeah,
and we'll get into more of that when we get the car up in the air. But generally, you've to do a clutch, you've got to pull out practically the whole rear part of the drivetrain, the torque tube, and the sort of the rear subframe that holds the transmission, because the transmission's in the rear. So my guess is if you're going to do a clutch, while you have all that other stuff out anyway, you probably want to do like torque tube seals and axle seals and anything else that can possibly be serviced during that operation.
Yeah, it makes sense. I rebuilt my diff. New clutch, new slave cylinder. I did take my torque tube apart and look at the couplers, and they were awesome. Considering all the Pro Solos and stuff I had, I can't say they're all going to be that way, but I opted not to change them simply because mine looked literally just like the brand new ones I had sitting there.
Yeah. Okay, so let's look at a couple of little things on this car. And Sam, I don't know if you'll have any real input here. This car's been around a little bit, but overall it's in fantastic shape. But like our piece of fabric, or our little piece of sound deadening under this carbon fiber hood, has gotten ripped here. And I mean, is this something that's still available through GM dealers? This little piece of insulation here under the hood, or is there anything getting sort of rare on these cars?
No, C4s have that problem. Some body parts maybe. I don't know about the hood insulation, except for I know I've seen plenty of it listed in various Corvette vendors. There's a big aftermarket, so I don't think you'd ever have any trouble finding that piece, at least for the next bunch of years anyway.
Yeah, and so as we mentioned before, the commemorative edition does have a carbon fiber hood. In fact, it
even says
it even well, and the thing I love about it, Chris, see if you can get a shot of where it actually says carbon fiber right here. The thing I love most about it is the applique to denote that the hood is real carbon fiber is actually a fake carbon fiber applique.
Yeah. Matter of fact, we were laughing about that on Saturday with Jeff Jacobs and Tony Savini about Jeff's car.
Yeah, that's like the most GM thing ever. Okay, so let's take a look inside here. My 99 had some of the same issues. I think if these cars do have a kind of a fragile spot, it's probably the interiors. You know, the seats tend to be a little prone to wear because they've got some pretty decent bolsters here. You can see this one has got the classic jean pocket rip starting right there in the bolster. But
Yep.
the good news on that is all this stuff is still available. Even like dash trim, dash pieces. We stopped at Mid America Corvette on Sunday. Talked to Mike Yeager there. He makes reproduction seat covers that go on in a couple hours. It's factory grade gray leather. It's like under $1,000 to refoam and recover both the seats in there. So if you're looking at one of these, chances are you're going to see some wear, especially on the driver's seat. But it's a completely overcomable problem. What do you know about any sort of electronic maladies these things may have? I've heard maybe some rumors of grounding issues or like air conditioner head units. Anything about that we should look at?
Yeah, a couple of things. Especially in the Z's, the digital air conditioning display and stuff can kind of flake out sometimes. I don't know that there's any real fix for it. I know the underside better than the inside like that.
Yeah.
Grounding, batteries can be flaky. I think it's because the car just isn't really metal. I don't know if the grounds get dirty. Car's kind of ground dependent. If you store them a lot, it's a really good idea to have a battery tender or some kind of maintainer on them. And the other one is, I guess it's kind of electrically related, is they like to leak water. Not all of them. A lot of them don't. But they can leak water in through somewhere on the right side. I'm not even sure where it is. The problem is there's a computer on that right side floorboard. Okay. And they sometimes get a little wet, and then they start to do fun things like your dash stops working. Funny, I know a guy that's got it's not a Z, but it's a C5, and it's had a lot of water go through it. You can see that on any given time, and his headlights don't work, and his wipers don't work half the time. His gauges have gone out intermittently, all this stuff, but the thing always starts, and it always drives down the road. So we're walking around the passenger side, and actually somebody just pointed out to me that the rain rail, the rain gutter on the driver's side's got a little bit of a crack in it, so we may have. Hey, Nick would know. Nick and Caitlin actually my C5. Yeah. So this thing, actually, you can see all my crap still in there because it's literally just as it came off the road. We drove it all the way back from Chicago. Got almost 27 miles a gallon driving the thing back from Chicago, and that was including the Autocross up there as well. And actually, somebody asked me how the BFGs. We put a set of Rival S's on it for the Autocross. So Pete was nice enough to ship them up there for us to Jason Saney's shop, and we bolted them on up there, and it was 35 degrees, and they still had the mold release on them, and it was absolutely soaking wet. It was a clinic, that's for sure. But once they wore some of that mold release off, they were a lot more fun. But they were an adventure. But very easy car to drive. I mean, we've had a couple people in the chat compare it already to a big Miata, and we tend to think of things in terms of how they compare to Miatas anymore because that's sort of our baseline, and that's fairly accurate. I mean, you coming from being a Mustang guy, that I sort of got used to driving the thing really, really loose and just flying around all over the place, especially the rear end. You don't need to do that with this car, and it doesn't really reward you for that. It kind of likes to be driven like a smaller car, like a big Miata, basically. Yeah, you definitely don't want to drive these sideways. The hardest thing I had to unlearn coming out of F-Stock cars and ESP cars, you can drive these sideways, but it's not really fast. I mean, rear end, I don't know, 3-4 inches out, good. 4 or 5 inches out, bad. A foot out, you're going to look spectacular. Go anywhere. So let's take a look at this this rail here. Yeah, there's a
there's a crack right in that rain gutter there, and I don't know. Maybe we'll get Nick up here to tell us how to fix that, or if we even need to fix it. Maybe we can actually use a little bit of like an acrylic seal in there and fix that up a little bit. So thinking about what else to look for outside the car. We'll take a look in the trunk here. I mean, the cool thing about these sort of in general is they are fairly bulletproof, and you're really just sort of assessing whether it's been beat to crap or not. Yeah.
Yeah. Yep.
You know, and this one obviously has been very well cared for over its life. I mean, we're looking at the carpet in the trunk, and you know, there's a very high. It's a good sized trunk, and there's a lot of space back here, but it's a very high lift over. So I would imagine that these rear bumper panels tend to get scratched up a little bit from people lifting stuff over into the trunk. Mm-hmm. And this one is practically, you know, it looks almost like brand new. I mean, certainly my 99 was a 30,000 mile car when I bought it, and it was in no better shape than this one. So I think, you know, the takeaway, yeah, you know, but it's nice knowing that mechanically anyway, these things are sound enough where okay, if you know you're going to save the money going in. This one was listed for 18.5, and we paid a little bit less than that. But if we got to put a couple grand into it, we're going to get that value back out of the maintenance that we put into it, I think.
And Z16s, of course, you know, like you said, people tend to want them. I mean, any 04, they're all except for the paint, right? 04s are 04s, and the valve spring thing is easy enough to fix on the 02 and 03s because it's a pushrod V8, but you don't get that paint job, right? And a lot of people still want that car. I know Jason Kolk is crazy about his, like insane about his.
Yeah, it's a good looking car, and we were seeing, you know, I think Kelly Blue Book says like $1,500 of a premium for the commemorative package, and that's about what we were seeing. I mean, it was, you know, but it was maybe $1,000 premium on the used market for a commemorative package. What else does the Z06 have above a base Corvette that makes it special? I know there's like maybe some thinner glass panels or something and some extra bracing. What's going on under the car?
Yeah, well, it's basically an evolution of the fixed roof coupe that you had before, which also had center glass and stuff like that. So the difference here from an FRC is obviously the LS6, right? So it's 405 horsepower, and in an 02 and up, it's 385 in an 01. The 12 and the gearbox, to me, those are the two biggest things: the engine and that gearbox, right? 12% shorter gearing-ish than a standard Corvette or even my C6Z. That gearing then went on to become the shorter gearing in the C6Z51 cars.
Okay.
And GM kind of uses that gearing, you know, the gearing in your car and the gearing in my car. It's pretty much the two standards they have for TR6060s and T56s. So it's stout. I mean, it turns some RPM. You know, even on the highway, it's not bad. You know, you cruise 80, it's not even turning 2,000. You know, but it's got plenty of torque to pull it. That's how they get good mileage. But, they have the real car. You know, the brakes are the same in all the C5s. You know, the torque, you know, the way it's all laid out is the same. Obviously, the springs are a little different, the bars are a little different, but it's all about the LS6 and the gearbox.
Awesome. All right, we're going to take a quick break from the action here. We're going to put the car up in the air here in a minute and take a look underneath and kind of examine. We've looked over it a little bit since the day we bought it, but we haven't really had a chance to take an extended look, which is part of the reason we didn't wash it, didn't clean anything out. We just kind of left it as it came off the road because we wanted to, you know, find out with you guys who were watching just what we got here. But before we do that, I want to tell everybody about the folks who make this show possible, namely CRC Industries. So I got this stuff out to be my little CRC demo tonight, and I was expecting, since this was a northern car, that as we got under it, we'd be using a lot of their freeze-off penetrating, cooling, nut breaker looser. The closer we look at this car, I don't think this car ever saw a day in the salt. Even like the bolt heads we're seeing just kind of peeking under the car. There's no rust on the bolt head. So I don't think we're going to have to use a lot of freeze off on this. But if we did, it works really, really good. It's a great penetrating oil, great lowers temperatures. We did some tests, and it was like lowering temperatures of bolts that we were spraying by like 30 and 40 degrees and actually shrinking them up by a couple of thousandths to let that penetrant get in there. Look, I don't have to tell you guys that CRC stuff is good because because you buy it all the time. Here's what's awesome though. When you're buying the CRC stuff, when you're buying brake clean, when you're buying their carb cleaner or their fuel injection cleaner or any of this stuff that I'm about to drop, when you're buying that stuff, you're not just getting a great product, you're getting a product from a company that supports the world that we exist in. They support shows like this. They support shows that our friends at other magazines do. They support race series. Our friend James Clay at Bimmer World, his efforts in the Continental Challenge series. They support motorsports at every level, right down to and including our $2,000 challenges at Grassroots Motorsports Magazine. So when you buy that CRC stuff, you're not just getting a great product, you're getting a product from a company that supports the world that we enjoy ourselves in. So it's like doing yourself a favor. It's like taking yourself on a little vacation even. Also, I want you guys to check out the folks at autobooks-aerobooks.com. We actually have a link to all of their Corvette books that we're going to throw up in a minute, but the book in particular that I'm dying to check out, I actually haven't read this book, and I'm dying to check it out. Book written by Chief Engineer Dave McClelland, and it deals with the first 50 years of Corvette history, right up to and including these C5s. 2003 was the 50th anniversary, and Dave was chief engineer for like 20 years on the Corvettes, and I'm really anxious to go through and read a book written by a guy who really should know, talking about some of the history of these cars. So check them out at autobooks-aerobooks.com. Car books, bike books, boat books, airplane books, DVDs, tech manuals, photography, art, history, all kinds of cool automotive transportation-based books, both in the store and on their website at autobooks-aerobooks.com. Also, a fantastic hub of the car community in Southern California. If you're ever out anywhere from San Diego to Santa Barbara, they're right in Burbank there. Go to autobooks-aerobooks.com. They got a great calendar of a bunch of cool car stuff going on there all the time. They have events at the shop every Saturday. Usually they'll have a book signing. They'll have famous authors come by and hang out and do cruise-ins. But they also have calendars of every other cool car thing going on in SoCal. So they're a great hub of the entire automotive community out there. Autobooks-aerobooks.com. All right, so we're going to pull this thing up on the lift. Actually, let's take a look here, see if we have any questions that are getting backed up here. Bill says grounding, driver's side door hinge. That is where some of the ground issues crop up. So we will take a closer look in there when we are going through the car, even in more detail. So Chris says, interested to see what we do with this car. Needs more rally tire. No, we're not going to rally the car. So our plan for the car, I think it's going to be a 2-year cycle for the car, similar to what we did with the Mustang. I think the first year we're going to spend it competing in classes like A Street and SSR with sticky tires on it, and in whatever the corresponding NCCC, the National Council of Corvette Clubs, whatever the corresponding classes are for that. The NCCC actually has a fairly hardcore competition program and a very active program in many parts of the country. Their annual convention is actually in New Orleans, which is fairly close for us here in Florida. So we're probably going to be hitting up some NCCC events this year, and we're going to spend probably the first couple of stories kind of dealing with the age of the car, dealing with stuff like this rain rail, dealing with these seats. Obviously it doesn't bring a lot of performance to the car, but these cars are getting to the age where you've got to, if you're going to start modifying them, you kind of have to bring them back to to a known starting point. So we're April, these stories will be starting out in the magazine, and we're probably going to spend a little bit of time on sort of restoration type stuff, and then get into some performance mods. Year 2 is when we start kind of having a lot more fun, and we're going to go maybe do some work in Cam S and the Super Street Prepared class. So basically, we want to have an option to run on street tires or on race tires. And then we'll be able to throw a few more modifications at it, get into some of the intricacies of tuning a suspension with leaf springs, which can get sort of interesting. And there's also, that I'm sure we're going to get into here with Sam in the next few minutes, there's some challenges here when you start, especially when you start lowering these cars, trying to retain some of the shock travel can be a little bit of an issue. So next step here is to get this thing up in the air. So here's where you get to see me pull it onto the blocks. Oh, actually, before we put it up in the air, let me show you one of the things you're definitely going to need if you have one of these. You're going to need a set of lifting pucks or jacking pucks or lifting blocks or frame guards or whatever they call them. So fiberglass body, steel space frame under there, but the fiberglass sort of wraps around under the steel. So you get these little pucks that go into the original tie-down slots, actually, and they make super handy lift points, because you definitely don't want to just throw a jack under there. We've got the rest of them under there already. Because you can if you just throw a jack under there, you can start cracking fiberglass. You can start collapsing frame rails. It's a bad scene. So don't do that. Okay. So we'll back this thing onto our blocks. So Sam, while we're back onto the blocks here, when was the last time you actually autocrossed a C5?
Just before Nationals.
And what were the circumstances? Were you helping set somebody's car up? Or?
Oh boy, what would we call it? Tony Savini came down to a DC event, and I think we were kind of checking to make sure everything seemed good on the car, and we ran it back to back with my car, and I think it was a tenth different between the two cars.
Oh, really? So they're on most typical autocross courses, you as you were saying before, like there really isn't going to be that much of a difference. Now, were you able to take some data readings? Like, did you see where the various speeds were coming from? Like, was it attacking the course in the same way, or do they attack the course in different ways?
It's so much in the noise. I mean, even when you look at the power curves and the gearing differences and everything like that, they seem to just accelerate at roughly the same speed. Even though they're slightly different in size, they're close. My car's a couple inches wider in the back. It's all within. To be honest with you, the biggest difference, which we couldn't see at that event, really the only place these things are really going to get away from each other, one versus the other. If there's a tight corner that's kind of not slow enough that I want to go to first, the C5 can yank me out of there. And of course, if there's a really fast finish where I don't have to go to third or smack the crap out of the rev limiter, that's kind of an advantage to my car.
Okay.
But that's pretty much. I mean, they're so similar. I don't change any. When I get in one versus the other, it's not a thought in my mind that they're any different when I drive them.
So how about these cars run competitively in both A Street on 200 treadwear rubber, and then in SSR on sticky rubber. So how much changing is there back and forth to go from one to the other?
It depends who you ask. For me, it's none to a little bit of shock setting change. That is literally any wholesale changes to the car. I don't change my sway bar settings. I don't do anything. And in fact, like the Dixie National Tour, this year I ran SSR. The year before I ran A Street. Same car, same setup. I mean, I just changed tires. I left Nationals after running SSR, I went straight to LS Fest. I changed my tires in grid that morning, walked the course, and ran LS Fest. Back 200 treadwear BFGs for the way I left Nationals.
And last year you also ran a set of BFGs at Cars and Cones. Drove the things several hundred miles throughout that week of cruising and stuff, and like won every autocross basically.
Yeah, Shelly and I did pretty well. We split the time in the car, and I think we, had I not been in first, she would have been in first.
Yeah. So okay, so we got the thing up in the air. I was going to do it live, but with just one person, it's a little tricky. But I did measure camber and toe earlier, and right now the car is sitting with about 2.8 degrees of negative camber on each front wheel, and essentially straight ahead on toe. So whereabouts is that from where we want to end up eventually?
I'd say don't touch it.
Okay.
If it's 2.8 in the C5, I mean, that's pretty much it. I mean, when you look underneath there, it's probably going to be maxed.
Okay.
On the eccentric. I run 3 in my car. My car is a frame pocket, so I can get a little bit more, but I only run 3. I could run more than that. It won't stop if I do. And I run 0 toe. So I think you're pretty much in the ballpark.
And you have a much lower center of gravity car. So like with the Mustang, we were at about like 2.7, 2.8 on the front, which wasn't really enough camber on the front of that car because we had a much higher center of gravity car, a much heavier car. We were working those tires a little bit too hard.
Right, and strut car versus double A arm.
So, okay, pull this front wheel up. So let's while I'm pulling this front wheel off, I'll give everybody the rundown on wheels. You may have noticed that the front and rear wheels of this car don't match, and here is the reason for that. So if you want to run if you want to run A Street competitively, you have to run a good modern 200 treadwear tire. So you're looking at either a BF Goodrich Rival S or a Bridgestone RE71R. Those are both not available in a particularly suitable 17-inch size. The car comes stock with 17 by 9.5 inch fronts, 18 by 10.5 inch rears. So you have to go to an 18-inch front, and for the BFGs, we actually run 18s all the way around. So the only really sort of readily available, without spending a ton of money on custom wheels, the only sort of readily available front wheel option is to run wheels from the back of a base C5, which are 18 by 9.5, with a small spacer. So I think base C5 rears are 57 millimeter offset, and the C5Z fronts are 54 millimeter offset. So to get your offset back to where it's supposed to be, you really need to run the 3 millimeter spacer. I think we have 5 millimeter spacers in here right now, and you actually have some leeway on offset under the SCCA solo rules. So the extra couple millimeters offset is not going to hurt us. So yeah, these 275 BFGs fit really, really nicely up front. So Sam, we are, let me find my light here. Oh, Chris brought his nice fancy light. Why am I going for my little crappy light? So we are under the front end of the car here now. What are we looking for in particular on these front suspensions? Any sort of wear items we should be conscious of when we're looking at the front end of one of these things?
The biggest thing that people probably have heard about is the bushings like to push out a bit or push around arms. The first one is on the upper arm. They're behind, in the rear location, behind the shock. If you kind of hold your light up there.
Yep, we are.
Slam on the brake. You can imagine what happens. You slam on the brakes with sticky tires. The wheel, the steering upright, the other bushing, the rear one.
Yeah, we're there.
Yeah, you see how it's kind of starting to push forward from the bushing?
Yeah.
Sliding forward. So that's a common one. People kind of freak out about it. 04s, incidentally, had an updated arm. I think they put more glue in there. But you can see it's still happening. It happens a little bit worse on R comps than it happens on street tires. But you can see that's in a pocket. That whole bushing is kind of in a pocket in the frame.
Yeah.
It really can't go too far. And I know when I first started driving Corvettes, my first car that I bought, that was pushed out some. I went and bought new arms. I put them on, and in 3 runs, they were just as bad as the ones that were on the car. I mean, it changes your caster a little bit, but it pretty much just goes so far and stops.
Okay.
One thing, that has been discussed, and some people, as far as I'm concerned, with the new common fix rule, everybody knows Corvettes have this problem. Those bushings actually push out really easily. So if you notice, it's got a big metal kind of like stop on the back side of the rear one and the front side of the front one. If you literally take that bushing out and flip it around, guess what? It can't push forward anymore.
Oh, okay.
Right? It's a stock bushing. The geometry's the same. There's no, it's not asymmetric or anything like that. So if you don't have any rules to abide by for sure, you can just flip that bushing around and save yourself a lot of trouble.
So you're basically flipping the rear bushing. So
it looks like the front one.
Yeah. So this plate right here is forward.
Yep.
Gotcha.
And then on the lower arms, you'll see the same thing. You'll have to wait till the picture catches up, I guess. But the same things. The arms kind of shift around in the bushings. What you really just want to watch is that the arm isn't really dragging on the subframe, and starting to gouge it away.
Okay.
So that happens over time. I've seen a couple of cars do it. Nice sway bar, by the way.
Yeah, we should mention this actually came with one of Sam's sway bars, which is what, 1 inch and 5/16, if I'm not mistaken.
That one's 1 inch and 5/16,
okay.
2-position adjustable. Yeah, hollow. But I don't know if you can see the bushing. The tie rod's kind of in the way from what I'm looking at here, but if you look in there, sometimes you can see where the arm starts to drag the cradle a little bit. There's really not a great fix. They don't tend to get too bad, but it's something worth watching because you can see how the arm is connected to the cradle.
Right.
You wouldn't want that thing to, really get bad over a number of years and then actually, break the ears off, the engine cradle.
So when it comes to replacing those bushings, should they start to wear? You can come on out, Chris. Are those bushings themselves replaceable, or are we just looking at replacing the whole arm there?
Yeah, on the lower it's the whole. I think the upper is the whole arm too, but they don't really take much pounding up top.
Okay.
The lower, I think you have to replace the whole arm. There are aftermarket arms that are cheaper, but I know some of the brands that make those. I've tried to use some of those in BMWs, and they didn't last very long. So I'd say probably stick with the GM arm if you need to replace it.
And that is that a fairly standard dealer item that most dealers are going to have or be able to get pretty quickly?
They should be able to get it. I don't think anybody's going to have it unless even if they're a big Corvette dealer, I don't think they would have that probably laying around. But the nice part about GM parts is they've got big depots around the country and generally a day or two away from getting any of that stuff.
Hey, speaking of that, do you have a good source? So there are a couple things on this car. Like, Chris, come around front here. So we actually don't have the correct license plate fill here. This has been sort of cut out. There's been a mesh panel put here to give us a little more airflow, which is technically not legal for stock class. The airbox under the hood actually doesn't have the cover on the airbox. It's just the filter is zip tied to the front of the airbox. So there's a couple of sort of stock parts we're looking for. Do you have a good source for like a website we can go to and actually look up part numbers and look at diagrams to see just what we might be missing there?
I mean, for factory parts, pretty much any of the GM places have the same fish programs, where you can look at the diagrams. So, there's a whole bunch of them. I know I buy a lot of my OEM stuff from a place called cheapestgmparts.com. It's a dealer over in Toledo. There's a bunch of them. So you just got to watch. I know there's one particular one that has free pricing, but they don't tell you what the shipping is, and you can't call them, and usually end up paying, stuff shows up. Little stuff like the license plate cover, that's hard to find. I know I had to replace one on my fixed roof coupe, and finding one was about impossible. I ended up buying a cheap reproduction like off of eBay or something. Mid-America, you might maybe talk about Jaeger in the building.
Yeah. So, I don't think anybody's going to talk Mike Jaeger into doing anything he doesn't want. So it's more of a question of sort of convincing him it's the right thing to do.
Right.
Okay, so we're taking a look sort of under the front of the car now. One of the things that I remember from back in my C5 days is just looking at condition of these cars. It's a very low car to begin with, so you're always checking for evidence of curb strikes and evidence of road strikes. You do have these two nice big protecto bars here that kind of keep the thing from dragging the ground. These are always going to be scratched up. I mean, there's just the car is so low that you're always going to have scratches on these. But if you start seeing these where they're just caved in or there's big dents in them, that's when you start worrying a little bit. But you're invariably going to have scratches on these pieces right here. You're also invariably going to have scratches on the underside of the bumper, but how deep and how many there are is going to tell you a lot about how the car was treated. This one has just got a couple of real small ones, like they pulled close to a parking curb one time. If you see one that they all have that divot right here where somebody took a driveway too fast or something, that's something to watch for in all of these too. And again, you're going to have a hard time finding one that doesn't have some damage up here, but you've got to assess how much damage and how much it looked like they just didn't care what they were doing and were just driving the ass out of the thing and curbing the front end. This panel right here, we're looking at the deflector that actually pushes air up into the radiator, and these little side panels. These are also notorious for getting knocked off because again they're very, very low. Even just on regular driveways, they are they're going to scrape. So keep a close eye on these. Also, yeah, and as Nick mentioned, they had some light marring on the on the subframe and on the control arms. And as you start looking back here, in fact, let me grab that light and I'll show you how much. There's so much aluminum under this car. Like this whole subframe is aluminum, and this is aluminum, and the control arms are aluminum. The oil pan here is aluminum. So there's some steel over here in the rockers, but there's a lot of aluminum under here, and as we know, aluminum is kind of soft. So you're looking at the leading edges of a lot of this stuff for scrapes. The bottoms of these control arms, all of this stuff down here, it's fairly low, so you're looking for scrapes under there. This one, luckily doesn't have any. And again, you might find a car like Nick just mentioned. Their car had some scraping under there. It had never really been damaged as such, but it had been autocrossed for a long time on our comps, and just the sort of natural use in those parking lots, they got some scrapes. So if you see some, it doesn't necessarily disqualify the car, but you have to examine a little bit closer. Okay, does it look like this was done? What were the circumstances that this happened under, and can I assess anything about it there?
Well, if Nick's up scrapes, I'll take it. I'll take that car back.
So we're talking about our friend Nick Dunlap, who they have a fixed roof coupe, and Nick and Caitlin do, and I think didn't you originally build that car for yourself, Sam?
It was actually Mark Valera's A street car or A stock car, and then he just wanted to sell it, and I kind of looked at it and went, "Hey, that might be fun." So I bought it and started an STU prep, and Nick and Caitlin couldn't find one that they liked, and Nick called me one day and he goes, I don't think he begged me to sell the car, but he pretty much really the car. And I kind of hemmed and hawed, and at the point, I kind of went, well, it's stupid. I have two, Corvettes. It's probably not smart. So, yeah, I mean, deal. I think they like it.
Okay, so while we're up front here and we got a good view, let's talk about shocks a little bit. So,
Yep.
Hang on, Sam. I'm scraping my headphones here and making crazy noises. Okay, so 04s had a little bit of an improved shock package in the Z06 out of the factory than the 01s through 03s did. Talk a little bit about that. Like, we're probably going to end up changing shocks just because it's legal to change to a true performance shock. But how good are the stock shocks in these 04s versus the earlier models?
I mean, they're not as. When they first came out, everybody thought they were all the rage. I mean, I remember I had guys that just refused to change them because, G said they were, the cat's ass. But I mean, they're not bad. They're not radically different actually. The shocks changed, I think, every year. I know the O3s were different from the O2s and so on. They're not horrible. I mean, they're monotube sacks. It's just the valving sometimes can be a little bit abrupt, and the bump stops are rock hard. They're like little hockey pucks. And to me, that's the biggest problem. These cars actually don't need a whole lot of shock. I've got tons of shock dynos here, in a file folder that I keep on my desk for these cars, and you'd be surprised how much force isn't in these shocks, actually, to start with. That's, I think, a big reason why, people think the stock stuff's so good, just because you don't need, mountains of craziness.
Yeah. So somebody just mentioned the fact that these cars are ride height adjustable. And Chris, I don't know how tough it'll be for you to get a shot of these, the ride height adjusters here. Actually, if you come around back and come up a little bit, you can actually see the ride height adjusters on the end of the spring here. So basically, you can essentially adjust ride height at all four corners on these leaf springs. But one of the things that you run into with these is you run out of shock travel really, really quick, don't you? I mean, you can slam these things and they look awesome, but you're not really doing any favors to your geometry.
Yeah, it's not so much, at least I haven't found that it's so much of a shock travel problem. It's just a geometry problem. You start getting the thing lower and lower, and the ball joint starts getting above, where the control arms bolt to the cradle, and you actually start losing camber and stuff like that. We've found, and if you walk around at Nationals, you'll see most of the faster cars are actually not the ones on the ground, particularly in the nose. A lot of times you'll see these with a lot of nose down rake in them, and when you first do it, it feels kind of awesome because it turns in like a rocket. But then about the middle of the corner, I call it tripping over its own feet. It doesn't want to carve anymore. It seems like the front roll center just gets too low relative to the rear.
Yeah. So what are we actually looking for to start with ride height? I mean, do we just want to sort of set it to where the control arms are parallel to the ground at rest? Is that kind of a good starting point?
Yeah, in that ballpark. If it's stock height, if you're reasonably sure it's stock height, then about an inch lower than stock. One of the problems consistently, and I don't know if you can get a good shot of it, the adjusters on the front, and actually it's the front and the rear on the C6, it's a bolt essentially with a big rubber pad or puck on it. And if you can get in there and look, you'll see it's probably pretty well deformed. It's going to be like all misshapen and stuff. It might even be starting to fray at the edges. Mine are getting beat up enough that we're trying to source new ones. So I can replace it. But over the course of the year, my car and another car just kind of kept dropping on their own, and we had to raise them back up.
Okay.
So because the height is always changing, it's very hard for me to tell somebody, put it at XYZ height.
Yeah, we'll take a little bit closer look in the rear when we get back there.
They're different there, but yeah.
Yeah. Hey, so tell us a little bit about, we're looking at these cam adjusters on the inner mounts of the control arms. We got basically cammed bolts on the front and rear of the control arms. I'm assuming we're adjusting caster and camber with those. It looks like. Right.
Front one's caster, front's camber, rear's caster.
Okay.
One thing that people make a big boo-boo all the time, and actually it's kind of hard to see, the bolts go in essentially from the leaf spring side and point forward and okay. If you look at the camber one, look at the front one.
Let's go around to the front.
Bolt head, you'll actually see it's essentially the eccentric head has hash marks in it, and it's part of the bolt head.
Oh, okay. So if we, Chris, if we come around to the back of this bolt here, we can see the hash marks. Right.
And you see the other side, like the one at the very front on the camber adjuster that's closest to the sway bar, that's just a floating washer.
Okay.
So where people screw up all the time is they'll set their camber, they'll set their caster, get everything where they want. First thing they do is they don't tighten the nuts enough. The factory torque spec, forget about it. It's not enough, especially on sticky tires. So reef on them. But then everybody wants to mark their eccentric in case it does slip. But they'll make a mistake. Instead of marking the head of the bolt,
they'll mark the washer.
Yeah. And it creates problem after problem. And it's easy. I can see how they do it because that one you're looking at there, if you get the car on race ramps or something at the track, you can't see that without sliding way under the car.
Yeah.
Right? So don't take the lazy way out. If you're going to mark it, make sure you're marking the side that has the hash marks.
Awesome. Okay, so let's start working our way to the back here. We can see, one of the things that impressed me about this car, just starting to kind of look underneath it here, is if we look at, and this was a northern car, obviously, so we picked this thing up just south of, or just north of Chicago. But if you look at like just the bolt heads here, these don't have a spot of rust on them. Even a Florida car, just from 93,000 miles of getting sandblasted and having some of the the zinc blasted off of these bolt heads, you start to see some rust on these. This car is obviously not seen much, if any, in the way of winters. I mean, I've never really had a car that put up with salt, but I know it does awful things to cars. I mean, and all we're seeing is just the very most minor of surface rust on some of these ferrous materials here. So in the back, we're also looking at the transmission back here, which you can see the fact that they've moved the transmission to the rear for better weight distribution. There's a drive shaft that runs through a tube called the torque tube that runs through the center where the drive shaft would be. So the clutch and the clutch hydraulics and everything are back here. So to change the clutch out, you've got to drop quite a bit of rear end here. How much do you actually have to take apart to do a clutch on this? Like, is there a way to just get this trans out, or are you essentially taking this whole rear end cradle out, Sam?
I'm having a little PTSD because I just had to do this a couple months before National Help, and it was not fun. Pretty much everything comes down. So the clutch is at the front, right, and the slave's at the front. So the exhaust has to come down. That giant plate that has about 8,000 bolts in it has to come down. The whole cradle. The nice part of this car is it's a little bit easier than like my C6E because it doesn't have some of the coolers. But basically, you disconnect the shocks from the frame, take the brake calipers off, and essentially everything. You drop everything down with a trans jack if you're lucky enough to have a lift like you do. If you don't, Nick's done it in his garage with floor jacks and stuff on their car. It's not something I want to do. I'll be happy to change cylinder heads and do things like that. I don't ever want to do that job again myself.
So, as we mentioned before, if you are going to do that job, I mean, I'd imagine there's going to be seals coming out the side of this differential for the half shafts. That, as long as you've got this diff out of there, you might want to change those out.
Those are actually, believe it or not.
Okay.
That's one thing would be the seals for the CV joints, but everything else, and that car is really clean. I'm looking at the transmission. I know the one I pulled out of my car with 30,000 miles on it is basically black because it's just the trans fluid coming out the vent, and then everything sticks to it.
Yeah.
So that car is really clean.
So well, that or there's no transmission fluid in there. So one or the other. What do you like for transmission fluid in these, by the way?
Nothing real special. I've played around with different things. Some people swear by there's a particular Royal Purple. Some people put GM Synchro Mesh in them. If you look up on the side, it says Dexron 3 on there. Yep. I know I've played around with some different stuff, like just different levels of Dexron. Doesn't seem to shift as nice. So when I rebuilt mine came with fluid, but I didn't know that, so when I went and bought fluid, I actually happened to find some true Dexron 3 at an Napa store in town here and threw that in there, and it's just pretty nice, but mine's a later 60/60, so I don't know. I mean, I've had Redline and other stuff. What happened to mine is kind of common. It's not a fluid problem per se, but first gear sometimes likes to weld itself to the main shaft on older T56s, and that's kind of what happened to mine.
Is that what happened to Justin's car as well?
I know what happened to Jason Frank, Hillary and Jason's car. Yeah, I think that's, you mean Justin Burberry?
Yeah.
I think so.
Yeah.
I haven't seen it, but I believe probably that's what happened.
All right. So as long as we're back here, we can also see one of the other things that makes these cars in particular real special is the titanium exhaust package that is all this stuff back here. In fact, it's actually stamped right on the bottom of this muffler, GM Titanium, or titanium if you're so inclined. How much weight do they actually save over the regular steel mufflers on these with the titanium, Sam? Are you aware?
They are definitely lighter. I know we do replace them a lot of times on cars because there are better flowing things, but like a boreless stinger system, I think the last time I weighed it was something like maybe 8 or 10 pounds more than those. Of course, they use a smaller muffler, as well. So, I mean, those are quite light. They sound awesome. If you kind of look in the tailpipes, you'll see they're not very big. So there are better breathing mufflers out there, but those aren't bad at all,
Well,
and they certainly don't do anything.
yeah, it's funny you mentioned not very big because one of the things I remember from my FRC was when we put an X pipe on it and got rid of this factory H pipe, and when we took the factory H pipe off, we cut it just to see how it was joined, and if you look at how this H pipe is put together, it's fish mouthed and welded here, but there is not a huge hole like there's not a hole the same diameter as this pipe in the side of this tube. All they do is they weld this tube in place, and they probably use the same torch and just blast a hole in the side of this pipe. So you've got basically like a nickel-sized hole in the side of this exhaust pipe on either side, and that's all that's doing your crossover. It's not like a true H pipe. So I was a little disappointed to see that. Maybe Z06s are better. Maybe it's a true fully flowing crossover pipe, but literally it was like just they punched a hole with a can opener in the sides of these pipes for the crossover.
That sounds like something a guy named Bubba from Kentucky would do.
Very much so. Yeah, it was pretty cheesy. So anything rear suspension wise we want to look at for maintenance or for fragility, or
They're pretty tough. I mean, even the half shafts in the C5 are actually tougher than the C6s. So,
oh wow.
I mean, they're hard. It's one of the reasons I like the car so much. It's fast. It's not very expensive. It does kind of impressive things, as much as people want to laugh about them being plastic and you have to have big gold chains. I mean, there's just not that much there to go wrong. There are eccentrics on there as well for camber.
And with what you pay for these things, you can afford plenty of gold chains afterwards because you're not putting a ton of money into these cars. So tell me about shocks a little bit. What do you like for shocks on these? And I understand you actually do something a little bit different with the upper and lower mounts on the shocks that you use.
Yeah. So I mean, there's various things. We do all kinds of shocks: Penske and Coney and MCS and Bilstein and things like that. My car has a set of Coneys on it. That surprises a lot of people, and inevitably I usually hear from them, well, you must have had them revalved, or they must be something fancy, and they're not. They're off the shelf, and in fact, my set is now 7 years old and have never been touched. The mounting of them, since you're looking at the rear there, we have some Delrin upper bushings that are, they allow the shock to pivot up at the top, so they get rid of all the vertical squish, because the stock bushings are very soft at the top. And then at the bottom, there's a few things you can do. On the rear here, you can get a shot of it. That rear shock mounts, it's like a fork that mounts over the control arm.
Yeah,
and then and then over a giant rubber bushing that's about the size of your fist. That giant bolt, which is 15/16 by the way, when you go to work on the car.
Okay.
When you tighten that bolt to 107 foot-pounds, it pulls the prongs of the fork into the rubber bushing. And it kind of binds everything up. You imagine putting that car on the ground, that shock needs to splay out, it needs to tilt a little bit, top and bottom both, and that rubber bushing really doesn't like to let it happen. I've played with various things. I had little Torrington bearings. I did all kinds of things. Somebody wrote a letter a couple years ago and got a clarification. There's actually a spherical bearing for that replaces that bushing, which is legal because it's a shock mount.
Okay.
It's not a control arm bushing or anything like that, but because it's a spherical bearing, it pivots and lets the shock kind of move wherever it needs to move. When I first put them on the car, the downside is they're a little bit noisy. That's the not good thing. The amazing thing is when I backed out of my shop and went halfway down Main Street, which is, I don't know, maybe 500 feet, already I knew I was going to have to add rear shock to the car. It was that much more compliant.
Oh, wow.
So it puts power down quite a bit better if you can put up with the noise. It's
yeah.
not usually terrible. My car's a little louder than most because the control arm's cast aluminum. The new bearing, the outer sleeve of it is steel, and they're not always shaped exactly the same. So my right rear one kind of touches on the sides, but not so much on the top and bottom. So I had to put some shim stock in there to try and quiet it down.
So do you have to press them? Do they have to be pressed into the control arm, or is it just a?
So the old ones need pulled out or pressed out, but you can do it on the car. You can kind of make a puller with some long all thread and a big socket and some washers. But the new ones actually just slide right in and use like a green Loctite type locking component. Yeah, so the new ones just slide right in.
Question about camber in the rear, and we'll show you eccentrics here. How much camber can you actually get in the rear of these things?
Not much. I don't know. Can you look at the left? I can't see the left rear, but I can see the right rear. It's not very much.
So this is the left rear we're about to pan over to right now. Sam's video is actually a few seconds behind this, so once it catches up.
Most of the steel frame cars are really limited. I mean, if you can get a degree and a half, you got something awesome, going on there. And that even goes for the steel frame C6s like the Grand Sport. See, that one's maxed.
Okay.
The other one is not, at least from the back, is not maxed out. I don't know if you measured your rear camber, but if I had to guess, I'd say you're probably maybe 1.2-ish.
Okay, yeah, and you can definitely see that this one over here is not quite maxed out
right.
on the right rear.
So some people will talk about shifting the subframes around, but I mean they have pins. When they come down the line, the subframes have pins that go up into the frame. So I've never really been able to move them around and have them stick. When you loosen it, it kind of moves side to side, but as you tighten it, it shifts back. So if you think you can get some out of it, shifting it over, you can give it a shot because obviously it's a little cattywampus.
So what's the number I'm looking for? Am I just looking for as much as I can get back there?
Yep. Yeah, in a street class one where you don't have any other option, you just max it.
And do you have any issue with even with the additional camber? Any issue putting power down when your camber numbers start to go up, or is that not really an issue with these cars?
So if you think about any camber at all, and there's a picture floating around somewhere on the internet that Haycotter took of my car. I mean, when you have any negative camber and then you're rolling, the car's rolled over in a corner, there's only a little bit at the inside edge of the tire on the inside part of the car on the ground anyway, right? Yeah. So what I noticed with more negative camber is very simply, I was able to be more aggressive with the throttle because I could lean on the outside rear, more and earlier in the corner than I could with less camber. So,
awesome.
It's not like we're trying to set it to -4. If we did that, we may have some power down problems, that we wouldn't have otherwise. But max it out. You just can't get enough. Certain cars are different. Like I said, the C6 is a little different here. But I mean, I'm at 1.75. So get all the camber you can get in the back of that thing.
Awesome. All right, Sam, we have kept you for a while here. What do you got going on here over the winter at Strano Parts? Anything new? I mean, we'll plug away here, my friend, because we've taken up a lot of your time here. So what? I'm gonna go sneeze, and I'll let you talk about what's going. Hey, boy! Hey! So what's going on in Pennsylvania this winter?
Well, we're going to try and stay warm. It probably won't be 37 degrees like it was in balmy Chicago.
Yeah.
I mean, not a whole lot. Doing another set of Penske's for a guy right now for a Corvette. I'm building a motor for my 1998 Camaro. Kind of doing some like Optima muscle car-y kind of things. Maybe I'll run it in Cam C once in a while. But when that blew up, I kind of figured I'd better take the opportunity, to do it. But nothing too earth-shattering. Some new Camaro parts that came out with, some hub adapters to actually run Corvette hubs.
Oh, cool.
On the front of an F-body, which sometimes, F-body hubs like to shear and make the wheels go bye-bye. So we fixed that by running the X-Tracker Corvette hubs. But, pretty much every day brings something new. Today was Nick Dunlap's Triumph TR6 shocks and a setup for a BRZ, and who knows what tomorrow will be. And I don't know if I dropped you or not. Anybody there? Did you put me on mute?
No, I'm back.
Hey, there you are.
Sam, you there? Yeah, so I think I flexed a certain way and turned my audio off.
I was wondering where you went. It got real quiet all of a sudden.
In my pocket. I'm sorry about that. Stranoparts.com. We will see you next year in SSR. I'm sure I'm going to basically pick whatever class you aren't running at that particular event and jump to either SSR or A Street.
Oh, that just means I'm going to bring both sets of tires with me.
Oh, damn it. So be chasing me. Sam Strano, thank you very much for joining us tonight. We will see you at Dixie, if not before. And we really, really appreciate you coming on tonight, man. We learned a lot, and thanks for sharing your knowledge.
Yeah, no problem, man. Bring that thing up to the Advantage School. Let's see if we can help you out.
We'll check it out. All right. Bye, man. I will be in touch after the show. All right. I don't know. Yeah, I think I leaned on my little transmitter here and screwed something up. I think I'm losing the battery in my transmitter is what's going on. So very quickly, I will let you guys know. crcindustries.com. Check them out for all your automotive chemical needs, lubricants, clean. Live TV is awesome. Autobooks-aerobooks.com for books and DVDs and photography books and all kinds of great stuff. I'm going to go put some new batteries in this thing. We will see you again next Wednesday at 9 p.m. I'm JG Path.